And thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar. William Constable, Spirit of the North Country will be the 5th episode in the Constable Chronicles series and is brought to you by the Tug Hill Commission and the Constable Hall Association. This series explores the life and happenings of the Constable family and Constable Hall, the jewel of the North Country, from a personal perspective with facts, some fiction, and family lore. And to learn about more about Constable Hall, you can visit them at constablehall.org. In case you missed the first 4 episodes, you can check them out, the recordings on the Tug Hill Commission's YouTube channel. And I think Katie or Elena are dropping them in the chat for me. My name is Jennifer Harville, and I'm with the Tug Hill Commission in Watertown. The Tug Hill region covers 2,100 square miles and portions of Jefferson, Lewis, Oneida, and Oswego counties. We are a very small, non-regulatory state agency that provides assistance to the towns and villages of the Tug Hill area in the areas of land use planning, local governments, community and economic development, and natural resources. So a few housekeeping items in case you hadn't noticed. Everybody's muted with their videos off to conserve bandwidth. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. Pay attention. There's going to be a quiz at the end of the presentation, and there will be prizes. So this webinar is being recorded to the Tug Hill Commission's YouTube, and the links to the recording will be in the follow-up emails from myself in Zoom. So at one time, William Constable owned most of the North Country, yet never visited it. So he hangs over our early history like a ghost. Almost every person involved in the original land development connects him to him in some way. Tonight, you'll hear how he and his interesting wife set in motion our community and how his spirit of adventure was picked up by the next generation. Tonight's speaker is Martha Constable Murray. Marty is the daughter of John Pierrepont Constable Jr., who was the last family member to own the hall in Constableville, New York. Marty was born and raised in Watertown, graduated from Watertown High, and received a BA in secondary English education from SUNY Geneseo. And so for almost 25 years, she taught in the Greece Central School District in Rochester and earned an MS in education and an MS literacy along the way. Her book, Constable Hall, A Story, is available at the Constable Hall gift shop. And we also have Peter Hayes with us tonight. He is the curator of Constable Hall and assisted with the presentation and research that went into it. So without further ado, here's Marty.
Here we go again, right?
That's
Thank
right.
you, Jen. It's really great to be back with the commission. I missed it after the series of 3 that we did last year, but we're back, and this is number 5, and this is William Constable Sr. We are Zooming tonight from the shores of Lake Ontario. A little too snowy to head up to Constableville today. So we grabbed some Christmas decorations, and we're sitting here by the lake and getting ready to zoom you in on the story of William Constable Sr. As Jen mentioned, William is the spirit of the North Country. But again, as she said, he never ever got to see any of his land holdings there. So how do we call him the spirit of the North Country? Well, we'll be taking a look at the names of some of the villages, such as Constable, or places in Franklin County, Constableville, New York, in Lewis County. We're going to take a look at also how William exemplified the spirit of the American Revolution and that era. And he connects in many ways to the people who built Northern New York. He had a spirit of risk, and he was a hard worker. And his friends and his family and his heirs carried this on, and they drove the expansion of the North Country. William was also a bridge for the North Country back to the founding of our country. So let's take a little look at William. This is actually his signature. I just lost my cursor and everything here. Jen. Where'd it go? Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. The portrait on the left side of the page is William Constable. And if that looks familiar to you, you've seen portraits of George Washington and some other of our founding fathers. This is the Gilbert Stuart portrait of William Constable. And as the information tells you, it was done in 1796 and he was around 44 years old. The Constable family originated in England, and everybody looks at the name Constable because of, the policemen are English policemen are named constables, and also in this country, there are some officers or law enforcement folks that are called constables. Well, the family did move to Ireland, and actually they were there for at least 3 generations, and that was where William was born. His father, Dr. John Constable, was a surgeon, and he came to North America during the French and Indian War, and he was a surgeon there. And if and when you get to Constable Hall, you'll have an opportunity to see his very archaic surgery tools. The family was in Canada for a while, and then in about 1760, then they moved to down by Schenectady. So as a youth, William grew up very much as a cosmopolitan. His dad very much valued education, and he sent William to Dublin to go to school. But William also learned to speak French. He was very fluent in French. Schenectady was a jumping off point for the fur trade. And the fur trade captured young William's sense of adventure. At age 17, think about this, age 17, he started being involved in the fur trade, and he would travel from New York City through central New York. I'm having a hard time here with my cursor. I wish I could do it with my finger. Through central New York, along Lake Ontario, along Lake Erie, and up to the end, which is Fort Detroit. He made many lifelong friends during this time, including Daniel McCormick, who we're going to talk about in a little bit. He also met the Oneida Indians when he was traveling through central New York. He also met a man by the name of Simon McTavish. And Simon was also a fur trader, and he and young William got into a bit of a skirmish, and young William shot him. Simon survived, and they continued to do business together. Now, William had a younger sister, Everetta, and at age 15, Everetta married a gentleman by the name of James Finn, P-H-Y-N. He also operated fur trading, and William went to work for him. James was a loyalist, however, and he sided with England, and he returned to England with Everetta when the war broke out. William returned to England for a while and did business, so he wasn't in the United States when the Revolutionary War broke out, and he wasn't here for the signing of the Declaration of Independence. But he did come back to the United States, and at that time, the British had blockaded New York City. So he ended up going to Philadelphia. And this is where he got mixed up with the gentleman in the upper left-hand corner, Mr. Benedict Arnold. Now, Benedict Arnold had been wounded at Saratoga, and he was considered a hero, a war hero, actually. So Washington sent him to Philadelphia to straighten out the city. It had been blockaded by the British, and the city was in a shambles. So Washington sent him there to help get things cleaned up and to put the city back together. With New York City still under a blockade, there were shortages of things. So Benedict Arnold decided that he was going to try to circumvent and avoid the blockade because he needed money to support his future wife, Peggy Shippen. He tried to make money avoiding the blockade, and William was involved in this, but we don't know to what extent. But this was about the time that Arnold developed his bad reputation. So just a little aside, if any of you happen to see a series on Netflix recently called Turn, Washington's Spies, that detailed the lives of Arnold and Peggy Shippen and the other members of the Culpeper ring that spied on the British. William became a patriot after dealing with Benedict Arnold, and he joined the Army to avoid any more association with Arnold. He became the aide-de-camp to the Marquis de Lafayette late in the war. And the Marquis de Lafayette became an important lifelong friend for William. So what is an aide-de-camp? Well, an aide-de-camp, according to the French, is an officer on the personal staff of a general, an admiral, or other high-ranking commander. And this person acts as the confidential secretary in routine matters. So basically, administrative assistant. In modern times, the aide-de-camps are usually of a junior rank, and their duties are largely social. While William was in the Army, he made many important contacts, and he was at Fraunces Tavern when Washington said goodbye to the troops. He also was a member of the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick, the business, and made many business and social connections there. So we're going to talk about Anne White, who became Anne White Constable. This picture of her in the middle is the first and only likeness that we've ever seen of Anne, and we only just acquired this in actually 2021. It was the first time any of us had seen a picture of her. Anne was the daughter of Townsend White, a very wealthy Philadelphia merchant and a patriot. And at age 16, she was selected to be one of the damsels that the knights fought for in the Mischianza. And there's a picture of the Mischianza over here on the left-hand side. So you're asking yourself, what is a Mischianza? So a Mischianza in Italian means a medley. And what it was in 1778 was a huge celebration in Philadelphia that was ordered up by Captain Andre for British General Howe after the British left the city. And actually what it was a mock knight tournament. So what happened during the Mischianza was 10 to 12 beautiful young women sat in a gallery, and the knights, or the soldiers, acted out their roles, and they fought for the damsels. So Anne being selected for this meant that she was a very eligible young woman. Now, Anne was good friends with Peggy Shippen, and this is Peggy down here in the corner. Now, Peggy, as I told you, ended up being Mrs. Benedict Arnold. Peggy was also a damsel in the Mischianza, and she became friends, quote unquote, she became a friend of John Andre, Captain Andre. And then eventually she married Benedict Arnold. Andre was a spy for Benedict Arnold. And when Benedict Arnold was caught, Andre was the one that was hanged. So when Peggy married Benedict Arnold, she and he ended up going to England when he was branded a traitor. And in many years past, Anne and William traveled to England, and Anne really wanted to see her friend Peggy, but it was going to be such an awkward situation because of his designation as a traitor that that connection never happened. A couple more things about Anne. She was a friend of this lady, Marthacustis Washington. And she also, at one time, danced the minuet with George Washington. Apparently, all of the ladies desired to dance with George Washington. After the Revolutionary War, when William returned to Philadelphia, he joined the 1st Troop Philadelphia City Cavalry. Now, that was established in 1774 to guard Philadelphia, and it still exists today. It was probably partially militia and partially ceremonial. This is the militia over here on the right-hand side, and I looked up the history, and it said most recently they served in Kuwait in 2012 and 2013. At age 20, young Anne met the dashing young writer, William Constable, and they married in 1872 and moved to New York City. Now we're going to switch back here a little bit and give you a little background on some of William's business partners. Yes, this is Gouverneur Morris on the left, and this is Robert Morris on the right, and they're not related. They were business partners of William's, and lifelong friends, but absolutely no relation. Gouverneur is here on the left, and I'm not mispronouncing his name. His mother was French, and even though we have Gouverneur New York, his mother wanted his name pronounced Gouverneur. So he was a business partner with William, and he was famous for many things, but particularly for his role in the Constitutional Convention. Gouverneur spoke the most of anyone at the debate. And actually, he was on the Committee of Style, and he wrote the preamble to the Constitution. Madison gave Gouverneur a massive amount of notes to be incorporated into the Constitution, and he asked Gouverneur to produce a clean languaged Constitution, which he did, and it's our Constitution today. Gouverneur was also a ladies' man, and he had a peg leg. Now, Robert, it's a little different story. Robert was a very wealthy man. As a matter of fact, Robert loved money. He was one of the richest men in the country. He helped finance the Revolutionary War, and he was a close friend of George Washington. You will find his name on the Declaration of Independence. Robert was into international shipping and then land development, and we think that he probably was William Constable's mentor. So if you're reading through the notes here, it says he had a spectacular bankruptcy. Well, I asked Peter, what is a spectacular bankruptcy? And Peter said it actually damaged the US financial system because he was such a wealthy man. He ended up with huge debts from land speculation, plus the war debt, and many, many personal loans. And in turn, he ended up in a debtor's prison. He was in the Prune Street debtor's prison from 1798 until 1801. He couldn't get out because he couldn't pay off his debt. So his dear friend, Gouverneur Morris, helped him out and got him out of his debt, got him out of the Prune Street debtor's prison. And for the rest of his life, Gouverneur provided Robert with a pension. William, however, despite his close relationship with Robert Morris, saw him as reckless with his business dealings, and he distanced himself. So after Anne and William were married and moved to New York City, they moved in 1784. This was after the British evacuated, and approximately 1/3 of the city was a total shambles, but it was ripe for setting up a shipping company. So with the Morrises, Gouverneur and Robert, and William Constable, Constable and Company was established. And Constable and Company traded goods all the way to China. Trade at that point had been limited because the British didn't allow it until we became a country. The ship in the upper right-hand or left-hand corner is the Empress of China. And Robert Morris backed the Empress. It was the first ship to enter Canton, China. It carried mahogany wood and ginseng, which was in great demand in China. You might ask yourself, why? Well, the Chinese used it extensively for all kinds of medicinal purposes. At first, the Chinese would only accept silver for payment for any goods that were purchased in China. But eventually, the ginseng was in such great demand, so needed, they would accept that as payment. When times were good, and really good, Constable and Company made a lot of money. When times weren't so good, such as when shipping became extremely competitive, insurance was expensive, prices fluctuated, there was a struggle to build the ships, and it was dangerous, William started to look at other avenues. If you look at the the red line on the map over here, that would have been the route that the Empress of China would have taken from New York City to get over to Canton, China. It was very dangerous, took a minimum of 6 months if they were lucky and didn't hit horrible storms or pirates or, sickness, running out of food, whatever. 6 months was a pretty quick trip. So where did William turn after deciding that the shipping was not going to be in his fortune? Well, he went into land speculation. And this is where McComb and McCormick come in. Thanks to the Treaty of Fort Stanwix and a few other agreements, land was opened up and William pulled off buying a huge tract of land with Alexander McComb, his friend from fur trading, and with Daniel McCormick. This purchase was known as the McCabe Purchase, and it was believed the land was transferred from the Oneidas to New York State, and then McCabe purchased it. There were 6 tracts of land. This is tract 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the idea was that they would pay a down payment for 1 tract of land, and that they would give a 1/6 payment for each of the other 5 tracts over the next 5 years, or until the debt was paid off. And then the plan was to sell tracts 4 over here, 5 and 6, and use that money to pay for 1, 2, and 3. Sounds like a good idea. And it had a good start. Since William was familiar with Europeans because he had gone to school there, and also because he had friends and family there, and he lived in London just before the Revolutionary War, he went to Europe in hopes of quickly selling land to pay the land debt. Eventually, he took over complete control of the purchase as McComb went bankrupt and McCormick ended up in jail. So let's talk a little bit about New York City while William was there. It was, as the notes tell you, it was briefly the capital for about a year. And it was an exciting place because enormous growth was going on at that time. And it became, within 10 years, the center of business for the country. George Washington's first inauguration was there at the Federal Building. And many well-known and famous people lived there. Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton lived next door to William and were close acquaintances. There is a paperweight from Alexander Hamilton at Constable Hall for those of you who have seen that. William was heavily involved in finances such as the Bank of New York, but he stayed out of politics. So let's take a look at some of William's homes. Down here where the 1 is, that was a home where he lived near the wharf so he could be near his shipping interests. Number 2 is where he lived in the Wall Street area so he could keep track of his finances. Number 3 was in the area of Broadway, and why not, right? Number 4 was a place that he rented in Greenwich. So if you go up to the top of the map, you see the PM up there. That was the Phillips Mansion, and that was where he would stay in the summer. Or he would go over where the BL is, and that was Bloomingdale. And if you recall in the other webinars, we talked about the family place at Bloomingdale. Now, Gouverneur Morris lived up here, where the GM is. And if you're looking at the HBP, I'm sorry, HBP, let's get that straight, because this man plays an important part also. This is where Hezekiah Pierrepont lived. And he actually lived in Brooklyn Heights. And he enters into the family in a couple of slides down. So William's last 10 years or so were not the best for him. He experienced ill health and was not able to visit any of the North Country or any of his land holdings. His brother James endorsed some large notes and caused huge debts while William was in Europe attempting to sell some of the 6 tracts. William tried to sell the land quickly to raise some cash, and he thought he could, but he didn't make a profit because none of the land had appreciated at that point. It was still pretty much wilderness. So because William was unable to pay his debts, he ended up in debtor's prison for an unknown length of time. Now, his was a little bit different than Robert Morris's. His was across the street from his house. So he would get up each day, cross the street, go to the debtor's prison, spend the day there, and then go back home for the night. Next day, he'd get up, go across the street to the debtor's prison, stay there for the day, go back home for the night. So his sentence to the debtor's prison really wasn't so much of a punishment for him, it was more to restrict his freedom. So William was in need of selling land to provide money for his wife and his 9 children, or he needed to find good, wealthy people for his children to marry. He did pay off all of his debts by the time of his death, but there was not a lot of money left. He never blamed James for the debt or its consequences. He was a true family man, maintained a good marriage, and an intact family. The family crest is here on the left-hand side, and the sailing ship is up here, indicative of the shipping industry. And here is our family motto, post tote naufragio partum, which means, after all, we sail safely into port. This little decorative box down here is woven with the hair of William and Anne, and is still in the family possessions. When William died, distinguished jurist and legislator, the Honorable Ogden Edwards, said of William, this gives me chills, William Constable was truly one of nature's noblemen. He was a man of sound comprehension and fruitful of mind, of high-toned feelings and vivid imagination. He was endowed with all the qualities necessary to constitute an orator, and was, in truth, the most eloquent man in conversation I have ever heard. Wherever he went, he was king of the company. I first saw him at a dinner party in 1796, and among the distinguished persons were General Hamilton and Colonel Aaron Burr. Even in such good company, all eyes and ears were turned to him, and he appeared to be the master spirit. So even back then, they were referring to William as a spirit. So William passed away in 1803, and this left Anne and her 9 children looking for ways to survive. The estate was in turmoil at that point, and there was not money to fulfill conditions of the will because all of the debts had been paid off. Of the 9 children, only the eldest, Anna Marie, was married, and she married HBP, Hezekiah Beers Pierpont, the home in Brooklyn Heights. So after a life of living in great houses, Anne had no place to live, so she went to Schenectady and lived with her daughter Harriet. William's brother James, the one that put William in debt, also moved back to Schenectady, and we believe that she spent time with James also. She spent much of her time, however, in Brooklyn Heights at the elegant home of Anna Marie and Hezekiah Beers Pierpont. It was at that home that she entertained the Marquis de Lafayette in 1824. Sadly, the building is gone, but here is a picture of it here. the beautiful home in Brooklyn Heights. So many of those properties don't exist anymore, and it's that in itself is a tragedy. This plate depicts Lafayette disembarking in 1824 when he arrived in New York City. Old friends of Williams and Ann's could not help her either. Robert Morris was living on a pension in a tiny house. And again, that pension was supplied by Gouverneur Morris. But he did write a letter of consolation right after William died. In May 26, 1803, he wrote to Anne, "My dear madam, the loss you have sustained will have made an impression on your feeling mind, which can never in this present state of existence be wholly removed. Amongst those who sincerely feel with you and for you, Mrs. Morris and I number ourselves, and if in the progress of time, we should be able to contribute in any degree to restore or promote your happiness, be assured we shall add to our own by doing so. As things are, we can for the present only join in lamentations for the loss of a friend we respected and loved, and add our prayers for the prosperity and happiness of the amiable family he hath left behind. With esteem and affection, I am, my dear Mrs. Constable, your sincere friend and servant, Rob Morris." After Lafayette's visit, Anne spent time visiting with her children and living a very modest and devout life. So periodically, she would travel to the North Country to visit her children and her grandchildren. This tally ho is actually belongs to her daughter Matilda, who married a McVicar, and it was purchased in approximately 1825. And in 1826, Anne did visit Matilda in Collinsville, and that's a small village a couple of miles from Constableville. It was a little bit of a rough ride, though, and Anne, at age 64, wrote a letter to Anna Marie in Brooklyn and talked about the journey. Now, this would be her last trip to the North Country to visit her daughters and her grandchildren, and there is no record that she visited Constable Hall. So on July 4th, 1826, she wrote a letter to Anne. Now, this was her birthday, so she was turning 64 on her birthday in 1826. But in her letter to her daughter, she wrote, "We arrived here, my dear daughter, on Saturday afternoon at 6 o'clock after a journey of 40 miles over the worst roads ever known in that part of the country at this season." Guess she wasn't there in the winter much, huh? However, we were brought forth through all our difficulties of jolting and bouncing and arrived at dear Matilda's just in time to partake of the charming refreshment of tea. They were amazed that I bore the fatigue so well. We had set out from Utica just after breakfast, and we dined at Boonville, 9 miles from Turin. I had such a violent headache when I got there that I had to hurry to the bedroom to bathe my head with cold water and to lay down. I treated myself to go down to dinner and was tempted to eat some fine salmon trout. Thankful to the Heavenly Father for all his mercies and preservation of us all. So it continues, your affectionate mother, Anne Constable. Now, this was in July of 1826, and in November of 1826, Anne passed away. She's buried at St. Paul's Cemetery, along with her husband, William, and his parents. So St. Paul's Cemetery in New York City is a very, very old cemetery in the Wall Street area. And I've had the pleasure of going there a couple of times. And it's very interesting because when I asked for directions to the family plot, the people there were pretty much astonished because the cemetery is so old. They said they rarely get anybody in there asking where their relatives are buried. So let's take a look at how William's spirit was infused into the North Country. First, we have the French connection. Notice the names in the lower left, right, left-hand corner, I'm sorry, my other left. The French influence in the North Country. Of course, we have Gouverneur, but we had, Vincent in Alexandria, Theresa, Chameau, Laraisville, DeFerriet, Lake Bonaparte, Diana, and also Gouverneur. And so how did all of those names end up there? Well, the French Revolution drove the upper classes out of France, and this was prime target for William. He sold hundreds of thousands of acres of the North Country to those people fleeing France. They intended to start 2 very large cities on the Black River and to develop that land. But when the revolution quieted, many of them returned to France because they were disillusioned that they bought wilderness land, and that's where their money was invested, and that really wasn't what they were expecting. The French also formed the Caserland Company, which moved into the North Country, but they also struggled to put down roots, and eventually they went back to France. We have a picture here of James Leray de Chameau. Now, he first met William in the United States while he was here collecting money that was owed to his father. His father was a great friend of Benjamin Franklin and also was a financial backer of the US during the Revolution. James Leray was also a good friend of Gouverneur Morris, and he picked up the pieces and moved to the North Country. He bought the land that the French upper class deserted, and he eventually owned about 600,000 acres. He had the Leray Mansion built, and if you take a look at this, you'll notice some similarities to Constable Hall, the pillars in the front, but also the wings on either side of the building. And the Leray Mansion is still there today. That was built around 1820. He also brought in many settlers, and he left a large mark on the area, in the area of Watertown. So that's our French connection. Now we're going to take a look at the Pierrepont connection. So as I had mentioned to you before, Hezekiah met William in France, but let's back up a little bit to Anna Marie, who ended up being his wife. She lived a few years in London with her parents, and she called her mother, Anne, a lover of nature and a gentle Christian. And she said her father, William, was noble and very attentive to her about her education. When she moved back to New York City, she lived next door to Aaron Burr. And Aaron Burr was described as being brilliant, but a tortured man, especially after he killed Alexander Hamilton. Our Anna developed an intimate friendship with Theodosia Burr, Aaron Burr's daughter. A fascinating and doomed young woman. One story says that Theodosia had the misfortune and met her demise on a sailing vessel that was captured, and she was forced to walk the plank. Hezekiah Beers Pierrepont was involved in international shipping, and that's how he met William in France. When they returned to New York City, he met the beautiful Anne, and he proposed to her, and he married her. She was 19. Of her union with Hezekiah, one newspaper clipping wrote, Miss Anna Maria Constable, one of the most beautiful belles of the metropolis, had been conspicuous in the society of the Van Rensselaers, the Stuyvesants, the Roosevelts and Schuylers, but ventured over to Brooklyn and was quickly married and became mistress of Hezekiah Beers Pierrepont's magnificent mansion and vast estate. 1 year after their marriage and moving to Brooklyn Heights, William Sr. died. Hezekiah became executor of the Constable estate and inherited and bought several thousand acres of North Country, and he became a very wealthy man. Anna Maria, who was her father's favorite, wrote diaries, and portions of them survive today and reveal that she was a vivacious, intelligent woman and lived a full life, including having 10 children. Eventually, Hezekiah's and Anna's sons took over the settling and development of the holdings of the Pierrepont land in the North Country. And it was their son, William Pierrepont, who built Pierrepont Manor in Pierrepont Manor. And this is a picture of Pierrepont Manor. If you've ever traveled up 81, you've traveled by the exit for Pierrepont Manor. So this is the next connection. This is the Constable connection in the North Country. William and Anne's oldest son was named William. And if you remember from the previous chronicles, we called him the Builder. He was just 17 years old when his father died. According to William Jr.'s grandson, he was a nobleman, but not a good businessman like his father. This portrait on the left of William Jr. personifies him as a bit of a dandy rather than the energetic businessman like his father. When he came of age, he inherited 20,000 acres in southern Lewis County, and he married Mary Eliza McVicker, the daughter of a fellow New York City businessman. Mary Eliza's picture is here on the right-hand side. And this is the only picture that we have of her, and we believe it was taken much later in years than the portrait that we have of William on the left-hand side. So after he married Mary Eliza, William decided that he wanted to travel to the North Country where all of this land was that he inherited. And that was when, and those of you who remember Chronicle 2, that was when he decided that he was going to settle in what was then Shalerville. And that was where William Sr.'s land agent, Nathaniel Shaler, lived. And that eventually became Constableville. William built Constable Hall between 1810 and 1819. As you learned in Chronicle 1, he did struggle financially, however, and at one point, he looked to sell a Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington that his father had commissioned. Brother-in-law Hezekiah stepped in and bought it. We think probably at the insistence of his wife. They kept it in the family, and today it hangs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. William also obtained money from relatives in Ireland to help build the hall. William died at the age of 34 after that tragic accident on the front steps at the hall. And this left Mary Eliza to raise her 5 young children at Constable Hall. And she did. She stayed there all those years. Had William Constable lived, had William Sr. lived, his plan was to develop his land holdings. The French, the Pierreponts, and William Jr. are all pieces of those connections, all pieces of that spirit of William Sr. This chart gives you an idea of how the land ownership progressed in the generations after William Sr. The Pierreponts settled in Tract 3 and Tract 5. The French and Leray settled in Tract 4. Duanes were up here in Tract 2 and Morris in Tract 3. Now, James Duane was the grandson of the mayor of New York City at one time. And he married Harriet Constable and purchased land as well. Gouverneur purchased more land from the estate, and a lot of it was located around the area of what we know to be Gouverneur today. These are some of the people that came after William. Families of Jonathan Collins, the Miriams, who were merchants, Schuyler Thompson. There were hundreds more people that came to that area, and they all took up the challenge to make a life and a living in the North Country. So what was the spirit of William Constable? He was a risk taker. He wanted to make something of himself, and that took him from being a fur trader in the woods to briefly being one of the richest men in the United States. He was a self-made man. He worked hard to educate himself. He developed a large network of friends, many of them influential. And he also dreamed about the best future possible. Even at the end of his short life, he was still dreaming of canals, steam ferries, and developing the North Country. Above all, he was a family man. He said the happiest day of his life was when he bought and furnished a home for his mother. And he forgave his brother James for putting him into debt that sent him to the debtor's prison and basically destroyed his finances, but he never held that against him. And he doted on his family. They were his priority. And I can say to you, having grown up in the Constable family, that all of these things have been true through the generations that I've known. My dad was truly a constable also. Many New England transplants and foreign immigrants took up the work that William started to open up the North Country. The pioneering and risk-taking spirit of the founding generation was brought to the North Country by these people also. So, our invitation to you, there's no better place to see and feel the lives talked about here than at Constable Hall. On our elegant grounds and in the gracious manor house, you will see many artifacts related to this story and connected to the other chronicles, and you'll become connected to the founding generations. And if you wait and watch and listen, you might just have an encounter with William Constable, the spirit of the North Country. Thank you.